The jungle was a furnace. Sunlight filtered through the thick canopy, casting fractured beams across the undergrowth. Insects buzzed. Leaves shifted. The calls of unseen birds echoed in the distance. For most, this was an unforgiving place, humid, unpredictable, teeming with both life and death. For Leo Carter, it was home, veterinarian, ranger, tracker, protector. He moved through the foliage like he belonged to it, boots silent on the mossy ground. Eyes sharp, rifle strapped across his back more as deterrence than threat. Each step he took was purposeful. He wasn't just patrolling. He was watching, listening, reading the signs the forest left behind. Today, something was off. The birds were too quiet. He slowed, hand instinctively dropping to the tranquilizer pouch at his hip. Then he heard it, soft, almost lost in the breeze. A low, broken growl, weak, strained. It wasn't far. He followed the sound, pushing through ferns and tangled vines, until he reached a small clearing shaded by a half-fallen tree. The smell hit him first, blood, rot, fear. Then he saw her, a lioness, collapsed, bone-thin, one hind leg twisted grotesquely in a crude wire snare that had bitten deep into her flesh. Her ribs jutted out, her golden coat streaked with dried blood and dirt. Her breathing was shallow, but she was alive, barely. Leo's stomach clenched. He had seen traps like this before, cheap, deadly, left by poachers who didn't care what they caught. Lions weren't the usual targets. But this one had wandered too far. Or maybe just gotten too hungry. The lioness lifted her head weakly as he approached. Her eyes met his, clouded, defiant, terrified. "Easy," Leo whispered, crouching slowly. "I'm not here to hurt you." She let out a soft, warning growl, but her body couldn't back it up. He moved closer, watching her limbs, her muscles, her breath. "I'll get you out," he said, reaching for the syringe of tranquilizer. It took 2 attempts. The first dose barely made her drowsy, her pain keeping her too alert. He adjusted the amount, trying to walk the line between calming her and not compromising her already weakened state. Minutes passed. Eventually, her body sagged against the ground. Her breath slowed, her eyes half closed. Leo got to work. The snare was tight, rusted wire embedded deep into the skin, cutting past the muscle in places. Infection had already begun to set in. He swore under his breath, pulling out his field knife and cutting the wire slowly, carefully, trying not to cause more damage. It took over an hour to get the snare off completely, clean the wound with iodine, and wrap it in temporary bandages. He cleaned her face, checked her vitals. She needed serious care. She wouldn't survive the night out here. The standard protocol was to call the station, report the find, and wait for a transport team. But he didn't, not this time. The lioness stirred as he lifted her into the stretcher sling, her body too weak to protest. "You're not just another file on a report," Leo murmured. "You're coming with me." Deep in the forest, far from paved roads and conservation outposts, Leo kept a hidden camp, a thatched shelter built years ago from salvaged wood and canvas. It wasn't meant for animals. But he'd used it before when an emergency called for it. This was one of those emergencies. He laid the lioness gently on a bed of leaves and folded blankets, making sure her injured leg was elevated. Her breathing remained shallow, but she hadn't crashed. Not yet. He injected another dose of antibiotics, followed by fluids. Every hour, he cleaned the wound again, replaced the dressings, monitored her pulse. He fed her water with a soaked cloth pressed gently to her tongue. All night, he didn't sleep. He sat beside her, watching her chest rise and fall. She was young, maybe 5 years old, prime age for a lioness. If she hadn't been broken by steel and starvation. He didn't know her story, but the damage told enough. He whispered to her as he worked, giving her a name the way he always did when they made it past the first night. "Aya," he said softly, "strong one." Days passed. Aya didn't die. She didn't eat, not at first, but she drank, just enough. The fever held for 2 days. Then broke. On the 4th day, she lifted her head without help. Leo watched it all, documenting her progress in a worn notebook. But mostly, he just stayed nearby, always close enough for her to smell. Always moving slow. She growled sometimes, soft and warning, but it lacked true heat. Her eyes were sharper now. She was starting to see him not just as a figure, but a constant. By the end of the first week, she licked the meat broth he poured into a shallow bowl. By the 10th day, she ate a handful of shredded venison. Her leg remained wrapped. The wounds still ugly, but cleaner, healing. Leo checked the bandages twice a day. He changed them gently, talking to her as he worked. "Aya, you're tougher than anything out there." She didn't answer, but sometimes she blinked slowly, a gesture he took as recognition. 3 weeks in, Aya stood. Not for long, not well, but she stood. Leo froze when he saw her rise, unsure if she would bolt, collapse, or charge. She did none of those. She stood, wobbled, and looked at him. Their eyes met. Leo took a step back. Not fear. Respect. Space. Aya didn't move toward him. Didn't growl. She lowered herself slowly back onto the blankets. But the message was clear. She was still here. Still fighting. Still choosing to live. As the days turned into weeks, Leo prepared for what came next. Aya couldn't stay here forever. When her strength returned, when her leg healed enough for true movement, she'd have to be released, returned to a territory far from people, far from snares and fences. But not yet, not until she could run. Until then, he cared for her like a ghost in the forest, unseen by the outside world. Unreported, undocumented, just a man, a lioness, and the quiet breath of wild mercy. He didn't know what had compelled him to bring her here. What instinct made him break protocol? Maybe it was the way she looked at him that first day, not as prey, not as threat, but as if she was daring him to care. He had, and she had survived. The forest had taken many, but this one, they had saved. Together. The morning was quiet, gray with mist. Leo Carter stood beneath the canopy of an ancient fig tree, the damp earth soft beneath his boots. A breeze curled through the foliage, carrying the smell of rain and distant pine from the higher altitudes. Somewhere nearby, a hornbill called. He knelt and checked the final clasp on the crate. The door was open now, just a wooden gate swung aside. Inside, Aya stood tall, not crouching, not weak, not confused. She looked past him into the open forest beyond. No hesitation in her gaze. No fear. She was ready. Her golden coat shimmered in the pale morning light. Grown full again after weeks of food, rest, and freedom from pain. Her wound had healed well, scarred, but functional. She walked with a faint stiffness in one leg. But there was power in her movements now. Quiet, dignified power. Leo stepped back slowly, giving her room. They had traveled under darkness, slipping out of the forest camp unnoticed. He avoided the ranger's network, bypassed even his own colleagues. Not out of shame, but to protect her. Too many animals rescued only became symbols. Media stories, donations. Leo didn't want Aya turned into a poster. He just wanted her free. She stepped out of the crate like she'd never been caged. Her head rose, nose twitching at the cold mountain air. Birds scattered from the trees. A monkey barked a warning from above. Aya didn't flinch. She walked forward. Leo followed a few steps behind, tracking her through the brush until they reached a ridge that overlooked the valley below, a wide expanse of wilderness that stretched for miles. Hills rolled into forest. Grasslands rippled in the distance. No roads, no farms, no snares. This was her second chance. Leo crouched beside a large stone and watched her silhouette against the mist. "You're on your own now, girl," he said softly. She paused at the edge of the clearing. Then, without looking back, Aya moved into the trees. Leo didn't try to follow. He sat for a long time after she vanished, until the clouds broke and a sliver of sunlight warmed the side of his face. He stood, brushed dirt from his pants, and walked back toward the trail. Alone. He didn't expect to see her again. That's how it usually went. They saved, they released, they let go, and sometimes, if they were lucky, they heard news, tracks found, sightings confirmed. But mostly, the wild took back what was its own. Quietly, completely. Months passed. Leo returned to his usual routines: field assessments, anti-poaching patrols, emergency rescues. He tagged pangolins, monitored vultures. He stitched up injured jackals and fended off officials asking why he hadn't filed a report about the lioness. He didn't lie, he just didn't explain. At night, he sometimes thought of her, Aya walking through fog, alone but whole. He pictured her hunting again, roaring again, maybe even finding others of her kind. The scar would remind her of what she survived. The freedom would remind her of who she was. Winter came slowly to the mountain ranges. Cold mist clung to the higher passes, and frost painted the grass in silver. The mornings were quieter, the air thinner. Leo was headed to a ranger outpost to meet with a local tracker who had reported unusual prints near the river trail. Just lion movement, most likely, but in this job, nothing was ever routine. He drove a small 4x4, bouncing along the rocky slope, headlights cutting through the fog. Halfway up the ridge road, he slowed, movement ahead. He rolled to a stop, engine humming low. On the path ahead, partially obscured by the rising mist, stood a lioness, not hunting, not running, just standing in the center of the road. Leo blinked, breath catching. She was larger now, her muscles fuller, her posture calm but commanding. And there, just below her left flank, he saw it. The faint outline of a scar. Ire. His fingers loosened on the steering wheel. She didn't move. Neither did he. They stared at each other through the haze, separated by 10 meters of gravel and memory. Leo opened the driver's side door slowly and stepped out. The cold air bit his face. He didn't speak, didn't raise a hand. He just stood. Aya didn't growl, didn't flee. She watched him with eyes that were clear, steady, as if she remembered, as if she knew. For one long moment, the forest was silent. Then Aya turned her head toward the trees, gave a low exhale, and padded off the road. Her form melted into the mist. Soundless. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Leo stood there, motionless, until her shape vanished completely. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. A reunion, if you could call it that. Not with words, not with touch, but with recognition, with quiet acknowledgement. Aya had returned, not to be saved again, but to show she no longer needed saving. Leo smiled faintly. He got back in the truck, started the engine, and continued his drive up the mountain. He never saw her again. But he didn't need to. She was free, and that was all he ever wanted. In a world full of traps and teeth, she had found a way back. Because someone had believed she could. And because she had chosen not just to survive, but to live. The forest road was narrow and winding, overgrown with low-hanging branches and flanked by tall grasses. The kind of road that hardly saw more than 1 or 2 vehicles a week. Except for ranger patrols and the occasional lost traveler. Leo Carter wasn't supposed to be on it that morning. His usual route had been blocked by a mudslide from last night's storm. So he'd taken the old service path, unmarked and half forgotten. As the tires crunched over the gravel and leaves, he hummed quietly to himself, sipping lukewarm coffee from a dented steel thermos. Around the next bend, he spotted something strange. A group of people, 6 or 7, standing in the middle of the road. Tourists, maybe, or hikers. He slowed the vehicle, squinting through the windshield. They weren't moving, they were facing the same direction. All looking into the trees on the right side of the road. One man had his phone raised, recording shakily. A woman clutched a water bottle to her chest. Everyone was frozen. Leo's stomach sank. He reached for his binoculars and scanned the tree line. Then he saw her, stepping slowly out of the underbrush. As silent as the mist around her, came a lioness. Ire. Even before he saw the scar across her flank. He knew. There was a heaviness in her stride, a quiet weight in her posture that he recognized instantly. Not fear, not hunger, purpose. The group gasped and shuffled nervously as Aya advanced. emerging into full view just meters from them. Someone whispered, "Is it going to attack?" No sudden movements. Another replied. Leo opened the door and stepped out. "Aya," he said softly, his voice almost swallowed by the air. She heard him. Her ears twitched. Her head turned slightly. Then she saw him. The tension in the clearing was sharp enough to cut. One man took a step back, nearly tripping over his backpack. A woman raised her arm as if to shield herself. But Aya didn't growl. She didn't crouch. She didn't even bare her teeth. She walked straight toward Leo. The others froze, too stunned to speak. One man looked ready to run. His legs locked in place. Leo didn't move. He just stood there, heart thudding against his ribs as the lioness approached. Every step she took was slow and deliberate. And then, something no one expected happened. Aya stopped in front of him. Just a breath away. She raised her head and looked him directly in the eye. Leo held her gaze, barely breathing. And then, gently, impossibly, Aya rose onto her hind legs. Her front paws reached forward and landed softly against Leo's chest. Not claws, not force, an embrace. Her weight pushed into him, not heavy enough to knock him over, but strong enough to make him stumble a half step back. Her massive head pressed gently into his shoulder, and for a moment that felt like a dream, she simply stood there, leaning into him, holding. Leo's arms moved instinctively, rising to rest against her ribs. He didn't squeeze. He didn't flinch. He just stood with her, surrounded by the shocked silence of strangers. She didn't roar. She didn't growl. She just stayed there, for seconds. Then slowly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, Aya dropped back down to all fours. Leo looked into her face. Her eyes were calm, still. She didn't need to say anything. And neither did he. Behind him, someone gasped. Another person let out a shaky laugh, half joy, half disbelief. "Did you see that?" one of them said. She hugged him. A woman wiped a tear from her face. That lion hugged him. Aya turned her head toward the crowd, then calmly walked past them, as if they were trees. She didn't run. She didn't hesitate. She vanished into the forest with the same grace she'd emerged from it. No roar, no drama, just presence. And then absence. Leo stood there a moment longer, unable to move. One of the men stepped closer, eyes wide. "You know her?" Leo nodded slowly. "Her name is Aya. You raised her." "I rescued her," he said, "but she saved herself." There was silence again, a reverence that settled over the group like morning mist. Then, one by one, they turned and walked slowly back to their vehicles, whispering to one another, not out of fear, out of awe. No one shouted, no one ran. They had witnessed something wild, something deeply human in the most unexpected form. Leo stayed behind, staring at the spot where Aya had disappeared. He knew what that moment meant. She remembered. All that time, all that distance, and she remembered. Not just who he was, but what he had done. And what he hadn't done. He had never tried to own her, never caged her longer than necessary, never made her into a pet or a showpiece. He let her go. And still, She came back. Not to stay. Just to say something in the only way she could. "Thank you." Leo smiled to himself and whispered to the trees. "Be safe out there, girl." Then he got back in the truck and drove on. It began as a single video, shaky and grainy, recorded by a trembling hand on a smartphone in the middle of a forest road. No sound at first, just the raw, breathless image of a lioness stepping out of the trees. She didn't charge, she didn't roar, she walked straight toward a man in ranger green. And then, she stood on her hind legs and wrapped her front paws around him. The world stopped. No one knew her name at first. No one knew his. But the video exploded online within hours. Wild lion hugs man in forest. No one can explain it. Not a movie. This really happened. A moment of pure peace in a predator's arms. People didn't believe it. At first, they thought it had to be fake. CGI. Staged. Trained animal. But then came more footage, from different angles, taken by the other hikers on the road. Someone uploaded the audio. You could hear gasps. Someone whispering, "She's hugging him. She's actually hugging him." It wasn't staged. It wasn't fake. It was real. And within days, it was everywhere. News anchors replayed the clip with wide eyes and soft voices. Animal behaviorists were invited on air to speculate. "It's not typical," they said. "It's not expected. But animals have long memories. And this one, clearly, remembered kindness." They didn't know the full story yet. But Leo Carter did. He sat in a quiet ranger station 2 days after the encounter, staring at a screen as the hug played again and again. Muted. Ire. His ire, standing with him like a child greeting a father. The world saw a lion. He saw a life he thought he'd let go of. The station was flooded with calls. Emails from journalists. Messages from strangers asking, "Is it real? Was that lion ever in a circus? Was she rescued from trauma? Is she yours?" He answered only one message. From a small conservation newsletter. "Yes. Her name is Aya. She was injured by a poacher's snare. I helped her recover. Then I let her go. I never expected to see her again. That moment wasn't planned. It wasn't trained. It was hers." The newsletter ran the story quietly. But others found it. Soon, the world knew Aya's name. And Leo's. A week later, Leo stood on a hill overlooking the valley where he'd once released her. TV crews had tried to follow. He denied them all. "This isn't a movie," he told them. "This is her life, not yours." But he understood why the world was obsessed. Because for once, the wild didn't fight the human. For once, a predator didn't choose violence. A lioness chose connection. And that shattered something deep in people's hearts. In schools across the globe, children watched the video and gasped. A 5-year-old in Tokyo told his teacher. She was saying thank you. A girl in Kenya drew a picture of a lioness with a heart above her head. In Brazil, an elderly man wept watching the clip and whispered, "Maybe the world still has hope." Aya's hug had become something more than a viral moment. It had become a symbol. A reminder that empathy was not ours alone. That nature, when not threatened, could give back more than we expected, even something as human as a hug. Scientists dissected the footage frame by frame. She recognizes him. One primatologist explained, "Look at her posture. She's not challenging. She's initiating contact." A wildlife psychologist said, "It's rare, yes, but not unthinkable. Animals, especially apex predators, form associations, emotional ones. Especially when there's healing involved." She knew he helped her. Others were more poetic. It wasn't just a hug. A journalist wrote in The Atlantic. It was a surrender, not of power, but of fear. Aya didn't act like a predator. She acted like a daughter coming home. And Leo, he stayed quiet. He didn't care for the spotlight. He didn't want his life dissected. All he wanted was for people to see the truth. That the wild is not just red in tooth and claw. That it's also capable of mercy. And gratitude. And that sometimes, when no one's watching, or even when everyone is, it reaches out and wraps its paws around the very thing it was taught to fear. A month after the encounter, a stone was placed quietly at the edge of the reserve, just where the forest opened up near the road. It didn't say much, just a single carving. She remembered. Visitors left flowers. Children left drawings. The forest remained quiet. Aya was not seen again. But her legacy echoed everywhere. She had become the face of peaceful wildness. Of memory. Of trust. Not just a lion, but a lesson. Not just a hug, but a whisper to the world. I survived. I remember. And I chose not to forget. Leo didn't watch the video anymore. He didn't need to. He felt the weight of her paws every time he walked beneath the canopy alone. He felt her breath in the wind. In the stillness after the birds quieted. The moment had passed. But its impact had not. Aya had changed something. In him. In others. Maybe even in the world. Because in a moment that should have been fear, she gave something else. Pure, quiet, unshakable gratitude. And that was the hug that froze the world. After the hug, Aya disappeared into the trees the same way she had come, without a sound. Without a pause. Without looking back. And Leo let her go. Again. This time, there were no wounds to tend. No crates. No secret shelters. No fevered nights or whispered reassurances. This time, there was only a choice. Hers. And he honored it. She belonged to the wild. And she had returned to it. But something stayed behind. A bond. Not made of chains. Or cages. Or blood. But of something far quieter. Far deeper. Something no one could see unless they knew where to look. He didn't go searching for her after that. He didn't track her movements or install cameras. He told the media she was gone and asked them not to follow. Most didn't listen, but the forest, patient as ever, didn't give her up. Still, Leo could feel her, on misty mornings. In the rustle of tall grass. In the long shadows of dusk. She had touched the world once. And changed it. Weeks later, standing at a conservation summit in Nairobi, Leo faced a crowd unlike any he'd ever addressed. He wasn't used to lights or microphones or people scribbling in notepads. But after the video, after the hug that swept across every screen and scroll feed, People had started listening in a way they never had before. And for once, he had something to say. He stood before them, wearing the same weather-worn ranger jacket he always wore, creased from the field, stained in places where the forest had left its mark. Behind him, a screen displayed a frozen frame of the hug, Aya's massive paws resting on his chest. Her eyes half closed, his hands lifted in quiet awe. Silence filled the room as he spoke. "I didn't save her because I wanted to be remembered," Leo began. "I saved her because I could." He paused, his gaze scanning the room. "And because something in her eyes told me she wasn't ready to die." He shared Aya's story, not the viral version, not the headline, but the truth. The injury, the recovery, the release, the hug, and then, the silence that followed. But he didn't stop there. He talked about the flaw in modern conservation, the assumption that protecting animals meant fencing them in, locking them away, keeping him at a distance. He understood the logic, the risk, but he had seen something else. Aya had taught him something else. She had shown the power of emotional connection. Not ownership, not taming, but recognition. And so he made an announcement. A new initiative. The Wild Bonds Project. A program built not on barriers, but on bridges. The idea was simple, radical, and deeply human. Create long-term, trust-based conservation zones where caretakers, rangers, and local communities build relationships with specific wild animals, not to domesticate, but to understand, to coexist, not control. Small pilot zones would be established in regions where animal-human conflict was highest. Instead of driving wildlife away or enclosing them behind electric fences, trained teams would live among them, walk their trails, learn their paths, treat the injured, respond when one of them, like Aya, needed help. It was conservation through compassion, empathy in practice. And Aya's hug became the emblem of the movement. The image appeared on brochures, field kits, and murals painted on the sides of trucks used to bring medicine and food to wounded animals. Children in rural villages drew her, asked questions about her. Rangers who had once carried rifles now carried soft-touch tranquilizers, notebooks, and voice recorders. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was working. Less fear, fewer retaliations, more rescues, more respect. Because people, for the first time in many places, saw wild animals not as symbols or threats, but as individuals, living, breathing, remembering beings. Just like Aya, Leo returned to the forest often, but never in search of her. He knew better than to chase something that had already found its way. Instead, he walked the same trails with new rangers. He pointed to the spot where she first appeared, where she had stood on her hind legs and leaned into him like an old friend. Sometimes they'd ask if he thought she'd ever come back, and he'd smile, shrug, and say, she already did. But one morning, long after the leaves had turned and the press had faded, Leo stood alone on the edge of the valley where he'd once let her go. The sun was low, slicing golden light through the mist. He heard nothing at first, just the wind and the far-off call of a crowned eagle. Then, Behind him, the faintest rustle. He turned. At the top of the ridge, a lioness stood, not moving toward him, not watching him, just standing, tail swishing lazily in the wind. Then she dipped her head. A simple, quiet nod, and vanished. He didn't follow. He didn't need to. He stood there a long time, the morning wrapping around him like a familiar coat. He knew what he felt wasn't imagination. It was truth. Some bonds don't need chains to hold. Some never break. Later that year, a journalist asked Leo how he'd explain the hug. The moment Aya put her paws on his chest and leaned into him like no predator ever should. He looked out the window of his small forest office, where vines curled over the ledge and a map of the reserve hung beside a shelf of field journals. Then he smiled, and said, "It wasn't just a hug. It was everything words could never say."
Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please comment 1. And if you didn't, just hit like. See you in the next videos.